This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is James Arnold Taylor, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi. I have a good feeling about this.
Joining us today for a cup of coffee to talk about the 6th episode in Season 1 of Andor. The episode is entitled The Eye, so I brought in a couple of experts to talk with me about this, well, pretty fascinating climactic episode so far, I think. First, from the Legal Geeks, Josh Gilliand. Josh, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Dan. It's great to be here. It's nice to actually get to talk beyond chat and email, so good seeing you, my friend.
Yes, you as well. You are going to be a great asset to have in this conversation, as is our next guest. He has been on Coffee with Kenobi several times, although I think it has been a while, from the podcast, Reading Between the Reels, Craig Dickinson. Craig, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Dan. It's great to be back.
Yes, it is. It is great to have you. Well, gentlemen, let's start off this conversation like we always do on Coffee with Kenobi. Let's start out with a letter grade, which should be no problem for you, Craig, as a teacher. And overall reactions to the episode. Go ahead, Craig.
So, in my class, I don't typically give letter grades. I'm on a 4-point scale, but this would be a 4, which is technically an A+. So, yeah, I'm going to go A+. It absolutely met my expectations and met standard, as it were.
That's it. That's not even a little tease.
No,
okay.
That's it.
Fair enough. Josh, what about you?
A+ as well. Highly impressed, and we'll get into the other elements of it, but this was a grounded story with high stakes. It felt like an old World War II movie, and that also tied into the set location, and absolutely loved the storytelling.
Great. This is an easy A+, or a 4, or 2 thumbs up, or 5 lightsabers, or whatever, however you want to evangelize about this episode. I had a really strong feeling that this was going to be a big one, because it seems like the first 2 episodes build up to 3, and then 4 and 5 build up to 6, and I think that's just great premiere storytelling. So I absolutely loved it, and the emotions of this, experiencing it for the first time, are going to be fun to talk about with the both of you. So, Craig, as we open up the episode, we're doing some last minute prep, and then there's this wonderful conversation between Clem, who of course is our buddy Cassian Andor, and then he is with, oh my gosh, now his name is suddenly escaping me.
Nemec, right?
Nemec, yes,
the younger
who
guy.
is Nemec is he's one of my favorite characters, and I think that's purposeful. But the fact that he writes so powerfully and so beautifully, he's so intelligent, and yet he may not seem like the greatest warrior as far as like his physical persona. There's just a lot of power in him, and I feel like he's really reaching Cassian. Craig, what do you make of their conversation here at the beginning?
Yeah, the quote that stood out to me where Nemec is telling Cassian that he's not ready. He doesn't feel like he's going to be ready for it. And Cassian has that great line. He says, "Don't worry, the excitement will kick in." Because he's been through this. He's a little bit of a veteran on this type of stuff. And I mean, that's foreshadowing for later, too, because you do see him. He comes back and he's like, yeah, I'm not tired anymore. But it's interesting that you have these 2 very different types of characters. Like you mentioned, Nemec is much more of an intellectual and kind of a big picture guy. He talks about, his manifesto and weapons being tools that, we can use those against the Empire. And Cassian's very much in the moment, and it's very personal for him. But it doesn't seem like he necessarily sees the big picture. It's more moment to moment type of thing. So I love the dichotomy between the 2 of them.
I do too. Nemec says he has sort of like an air quotes. You can hear it in the delivery of the actor. The role of mercenaries in the galactic struggle for freedom. And then he kind of espouses a little bit. He says, I have the simple conclusion, weapons are tools, that those that use them are by extension assets that we must use to our best advantage. The Empire has no moral boundaries. Why should we not take hold of every chance we can? And then he says, let us see how an insurgency adapts. And then Cassian has this great line where he says, well, you're half right. He's trying to kind of pick and choose. He's trying to inspire. He's also being kind of pragmatic in his own way. Josh, what do you make of that little exchange?
It's a good exchange, and to weigh into my political theory knowledge from college. Nemec's John Locke. He's the reaction to Hobbes, and so like it's not laws with teeth or atrocity on top of atrocity, so you just get numb to all the evil. It's a John Locke type evolution, which the next stage would be Madison. So there's this, march towards revolution, and the idea that government should not be oppressive. It should be designed for fundamental freedoms. So you are not living in fear, but living in freedom. So
if there are any questions about why I've had these two on, now you've got your answer. I love that. I like the John Locke thing. That's quite good. I also think it's quite damning for me as an educator when Cassian says the Empire doesn't learn. They don't grow. They are stagnant. We are more. I don't feel like, Craig, that he is ready to sign up and join the rebellion, but the seeds are planted.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's very personal for him. I mean, and right now he is a mercenary. He's the only one of this group that's being paid to do that. So he has ulterior motives. He's not a true believer yet. And for me, that's what's interesting is that I'm assuming that we're going to see that bridged. With the Cassian that we see in Rogue One is very much a true believer, and that bridged those two characters. That's what I'm looking to see, and we're starting to see some of that in this. With the cost that happens at the end of this episode.
I think that Nemec says, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here because, he says, do I look like I'm thankful? They're all trying to kind of figure out why he's there, but I think they want to believe in him. Josh, I cut you off. What were you going to say?
Cassian has a moral center that's evident throughout this episode, and there are a couple, when they start taking hostages, the comment about no one needs to die. And his other acts that we'll talk about as we progress through the analysis here, he has a moral center. He returns the Sky Kyber, and he just takes what he contracted for. And when he shoots Skeen, that's a moral decision he makes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, which we'll definitely get to that at the end for sure, because I think that's a pretty rich thing. There's a cut to the Imperial in charge. He talks about the Donnies. He says they have great difficulty holding multiple ideas simultaneously. We found the best way to steer them is we'd like to offer alternatives. Basically, he thinks you can basically. It's colonialism. I mean, let's just cut right to the chase. This is it's a nasty business. Historically, we've seen it throughout the entire world. Very much a dumbing down or a minimization of a culture and a people because they are not what the Empire is, what the Empire believes is strength. And yet, as you watch the Donnies coming down, that beautiful shot of them coming down into that valley, you don't get any of that. What do you think's really going on here? Is this really just a giant metaphor? I mean, it is certainly metaphorical, but I also think there's more to it.
Yeah, J-Hold, the guy we were just referring to, he's very much like the personification of what they've described the Empire as. He's overweight.
He can't even buckle his belt.
Yeah, exactly. And they make a big point of that. Like he's not getting along with his family. He's super arrogant, and he's very much the stereotypical Imperial.
Mm-hmm. He is that. Not only do they mock him in his culture, but they mock his religion too. And yet they still want to be a part of the eye. Josh, this entire exchange here with these three Imperial leaders, one, of course, is very much going against the Empire, even though they have no idea of what's going on. What sort of jumps out to you in their conversation?
I do agree with the colonialism. They are disparaging a faith-based culture, which is one of the most well-defined in a short period of time that we've seen in Star Wars. So, which I found fascinating to see, because they're not known for, let's create a religion and show a culture. So the entire discussion about what they trade for the lease for the property, to how they interact with them, and just wanting to stamp out that individual faith system that they have, that their culture, and just steamroll it. And it highlights the insidious nature of the Empire. And it's more than just Palpatine cackling, that there are people going along with it, going like, oh yeah, we're on board. We'll build roads, we'll take what we want, and we don't need these peons who are not important to us.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of isms in this entire thing. Then we see them kind of last minute prepping, getting the radios ready, and then you've got Vel, and then you've got Cinta, who are in another area, which we saw them separate in the end of the last episode. Pretty soon, this is really not all that important, but I just like seeing anything scuba related in Star Wars. And I just love that little sequence. It kind of reminds me of episode 1. There's some great stuff in Resistance with the Aqua stormtroopers, things of that. Josh, I see you're smiling, nodding your head. You caught that as well.
That, and Kenobi with into the Inquisitor base. So it's like, bravo, and the little scooter, because there are real world equivalents of those for being able to just like hang on and zoom through the water. It's like, that's cool, and it looked neat. So just the storytelling all goes to the spy story.
Craig, how important is it that Terramin is a former stormtrooper, and the fact that we just now are finding out about it?
Well, I thought it was fascinating. We just now found out about it. And, my thing for this whole series to this point is, this was the first episode that I really paid attention to the character names, because I was afraid to get invested in them. And I guess I was right to be, not wanting to invest in them. And so, but I made really a good point of keeping track of who was who. And then when I found that out, I was like, I immediately thought of Finn. And
oh, true. I never thought about that.
This would have been, this is a story that I think is a fascinating. He's not the only one, that there are these stormtrooper defectors. So to see that play out this way, as opposed to the way we saw it with Finn, I thought was a fascinating thing to do. And then to just drop that in, it didn't feel like that it had to have been inserted earlier. Like this was a natural time to insert it. I didn't feel like I was like, oh wow, okay, you should have told me this earlier. It was the exact right time to tell it, but it just made I was more invested immediately in him. Like for him, this is very personal. He's probably done a lot of these things that he's fighting against now. And then to see him die here too, like I was more invested in him, and that death meant more because I could kind of extrapolate what he had been before.
Sure. And I kind of saw it. I see exactly what you mean, and I completely feel that. But I found it sort of a different thing. It sort of rubbed me the wrong way. Not that he was a former stormtrooper. In fact, I'm just kind of like, well, yeah, that tracks, considering everything that's going on and how well he knows about marching and things like that, how he teaches them. And I think in episode 4, how to march. But what my thinking is, if we're all working together to do this, to have David go to battle with Goliath, but we continue not to give David all of the rocks in his sling, like why are we continuing to keep things from Cassian / Clem? Or maybe I already have my answer. Maybe it's just as simple as we're not quite sure if we can trust him, but you almost kind of get the sense that they're not, I don't know. Do they, what's going on here? Do they trust each other? I'm trying not to put my thinking of this particular conversation into what happens at the end of the episode. But at that moment, I found myself frustrated. How many more secrets are we going to keep from each other? And how can you expect everyone to trust each other?
So this is the challenge with spycraft, and that is you don't want loose ends. If somebody is captured, you don't want them to have information that they can disclose that would lead back to Cassian's family. or any of their families. Or so I get trying to keep secrets, because for those who are left behind, I hope they're dead, because if they're still alive, that's a problem.
Right.
So that's the way I look at it. I also want to raise the point that the best way to recruit for the rebellion is from the Empire. You know, we had Tala and Kenobi, that they joined with a very specific goal of like, hey, we're going to go help people. And it doesn't go according to plan. And they decide to get out. So, again, for the Resistance, the First Order would have been the best recruiting poster for them with, is this what I really want to be doing with my life?
Right. Did I sign up for this? As it turns out, being kind to people is actually pretty important. And it's nice to see that. The history behind why people change, I find endlessly fascinating, but it's also fascinating as we're getting ready for this big celebratory event. And the Donnie natives, I think I'm saying that correctly, are starting to show up. I'm really drawn to the leader of this. He's clearly their elder statesman, their shaman in charge of the entire experience. Lieutenant Gorn is getting everybody like ready. He's as cool as the other side of the pillow, but at this point, guys, you know, I don't really want to go through every narrative point beat by beat like we've been doing. So, and that's on me for kind of leading the discussion that way. But I feel like there's so many interesting things. But this is the moment where I can honestly say for about 25 minutes, my palms are sweating. I am nervous, and I keep thinking, I am so glad I feel this way. Just, you know, anything over from the shaman and his people walking up to actually getting inside the base itself. What are some high points that both of you want to talk about? I've got a couple, but Josh, we'll go in reverse order this time. Where do you want to start?
Our ghosts have long memories, and I think cold hands or something along those lines, or may the eye find some good in you.
Yes.
Yeah, it's there's almost like a again, there's that heist movie, whether it's like that Shawshank Redemption feeling of watching like, where are they going to make it and how close they come to being caught, because Gorn has to keep a straight face, and in playing translator, he doesn't tell the commandant what's actually said, and you realize that the shaman also can speak English by his reactions.
Yes.
So all of that just really plays well in don't get caught. And it was brilliantly shot. So you feel that the entire time.
I also really like the entire thing where there's tension of, don't make eye contact. Don't just leave them alone, and they will leave you alone. Like when you see a snake on the road when you're walking outside or something like that. But it's not only because we're worried about, Cassian and the other three, but it's also we're worried about the Imperials kind of getting all chesty and going rogue and putting a big crimp in this very intense plan that's been planned out for a very, very long time. So you're kind of getting it from both perspectives, because there's a lot of wild cards in this scenario. And then you add insult to injury we get to see an Imperial officer from the back urinating. So now we can cross that off of our bingo card.
I missed that, and I've watched it twice.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I consider
Some great sound design there.
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
It's when they're hiding under those rocks.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
okay.
Vel and Cinda
Just
are,
more
and then
Imperial
he comes
arrogance
up-
right there.
That's exactly right. There's a lot of that on display, and I'm glad, Josh, you pointed out the fact that the tribal shaman, I wish I knew his name, you can tell by his reaction, that he speaks English, because he looks at them and he says, and you can tell that he's thinking, why are you saying that? Why are you not just being honest? Because he's trying to keep the peace, because he wants everything to fall according to plan. It also wouldn't surprise me if Lieutenant Gorn also was very interested in actually not anyone getting hurt, of these innocent people that did ask for nothing but just to leave them alone so they can so they can live. So Craig, what do you want to point out from this particular 10-minute segment?
Man, the editing in this entire episode just was amazing to me. I loved the fact that they had that rhythmic chant and it just kept repeating and you kept coming back to that. So you hadn't really missed anything because you're hearing a lot of the same stuff, but it just kind of added to the tension. They just keep cutting back to that. And they're just three different, things. You get to see the different teams working and then the rhythmic chanting. And that just kept building almost like another set of drums, or your heartbeat just keeps going and ramping up the tension. So for me, that was it was so dynamic. It just kept going. And so that just so added to the drama for this episode.
When we see J-Hold, I believe that's the name of the Imperial. When we see his interactions with his family, it's very very archetypal. The inattentive husband and father that's a bully, he believes only in strength, yet he can't even buckle his belt or fasten it because his waist is expanded, as we've talked about a little bit earlier in this show. I'm very dismissive of his son. Is his son actually sick? Is his son just sick of his father? There's a lot of ugliness there, but I feel like the payoff for this comes later, after the actual seizure of the entire compound itself. So I guess we can kind of table that. Let's talk about the exchange of the pelts. What do you think is symbolic here, Craig, in this interaction or exchange? Actually, no, Craig, you just went. Josh, what do you think?
I flash back to property in law school because it's a 3-year lease that involves an exchange of a pelt. Legally, I think that would hold up because it doesn't have to be money. And if they value the pelt from a goat, and they do say goat, so we have goats in Star Wars now, I think that's legally enforceable. I do think it's weird because they immediately burn the pelt, which again, why are they just trading pelts as opposed to just like, here's a new pelt for you and we get to keep the base that's on your sacred land, versus the exchange is weird. I thought the exchange was weird, but I think as a contract for a lease that would hold up, I would want it in writing because that shouldn't be oral. But again, that was my reaction of kicking into, is that a valid lease? And I think it is.
They do even say the 3-year thing, when they're conversing, when they're smelling the pelts, as you just mentioned. I feel like, Craig, there's some symbolism there. And when they take the pelt from the Empire and they throw it on the fire, I don't know. Did you see something in that?
It's interesting at all that you have the Imperials participating in the ceremony for me, because you've seen how J-Hold was very arrogant about, they'll basically believe anything and they're primitives and all of these. He's talking down about what they are, but then they participate in it. And then it is kind of funny that, they actually take the Imperial pelt and burn it. So that almost feels like, yeah, your stuff's, I'm going to throw it on the fire because it's worthless or it's less than. It felt that way, but I'm sure it was not that. It was probably more of a ceremonial thing, but it looked that way. That's just kind of the way you would take it too. That like, I just handed you something and now you lit it on fire. So it's interesting. it's just weird how they feel very separate for most of it. They're going to just stand there and kind of keep the peace, but now they're actually, I was like, they're participating in the ceremony. That's okay. I was not expecting that.
Well, I love the ancient. Well, it's all part of the pretend, right? They're putting on a show of things, but everyone knows at this point that it's just an act. It's just there's 2 ceremonies going on here. There's the actual one, you may enter our sacred temple, peace to those who come in peace. And then there's the Empire putting on airs, putting on a show so they can, they were bragging earlier in the episode about how they've been wiping out all these people by systemic racism, for lack of a better term, by building up, cheap liquor and taverns everywhere and setting them up against themselves. And it's quite sinister in a way that we haven't seen the Empire. Josh, if I'm an attorney and I'm trying to accuse the Empire of of these things. You can't accuse someone of systemic racism, at least legally. At least I don't think so. But what would I do here?
Well, it's genocide. So when you decide to wipe out an entire people,
Yes.
and there those go like, well, how many have to die for it to be genocide? Okay, attempted. Like you've decided to wipe them out. We have from U.S. history Trail of Tears with the Indian Removal Act. You then have when we switch gears in the 1880s, 1890s with guilt in trying to create the reservation system, trying to correct the wrong. Now, we were wrong both times with how we did it, but you get into, there are real world examples of this is bad, where people become addicted to some substance abuse with the comfort units that the empire is adding along this trail for the indigenous people. So, yeah, I do think genocide's on the table here, and I would definitely look at it as a crime against humanity. But I'm a little hawkish that way. So.
Hey, but I completely interested in. I think you're right on the money there. There's an interesting piece of drama where Cinta and Vel are in place. They're ready to basically say this mission is a go. It seems like everything's good, but Vel is starting to get extremely hesitant and reluctant. She just won't pull the trigger, metaphorically speaking. And this is a key moment for me where I legitimately thought, is this going to happen? I mean, we know that Cassian's going to live, but as you mentioned earlier, Craig, that's the only one that we feel like we can take a breath on and become attached to, because we know he's going to survive at least until the end of Rogue One. But talk about the drama and tension here. What do you think is going through Vel's mind?
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, like pulling the trigger. Like she's going to be literally pulling the trigger, or maybe killing people, and maybe her own people are going to die. And I think it's that it became very real for her that there's going to be a loss of life on one side or the other, or both. And so I think that even though she fully believes in the cause and believes that her cause is right, and they've got this well planned out, and it's everyone's in place, everyone's done exactly what they need to do. The only thing that she could be thinking, in my opinion, is, am I willing to take that step to put my people on the line and to possibly take lives in the course of what we're going to do?
I think the genius of Dan Gilroy, who is a writer on this episode, is that he enacts a legitimate vulnerability in every character. Imperial, rebel, a mercenary, ISB agent, whatever the case may be. He adds layers and a unique quality to each of them. We haven't seen Vel vulnerable at all. We've seen her like reluctant to trust Clem, but seeing her afraid when she has appeared to have been very much the spearhead, we know that Luthen really trusts her. I found it maddening and refreshing all at the same breath, because I think we need that vulnerability to care about these characters. If she's just one-dimensional and gruff, it just doesn't work so well. She eventually does do it, and it looks like it's like some sort of device set up to mess up the comms. I believe that's correct. Josh, I believe did you say the quote? Did one of you say the quote, "May the eye find the good in all of us"? And then when he says,
find the good in you, or some good in you. Yes. So I did say that. I will add that we have characters with humanity, that not everything is the Michael Bay movie of explosions and people running. And it's just, here are people who are scared that knowing that I could die, those around me could die. We've been working at this for months, maybe years. Stakes are real. And that's very refreshing to see, as opposed to everything's just being over the top.
Right. Well, then, speaking of over the top, or more likely how quickly they get to the bottom, they do kind of a Mission Impossible stunt, and Vel and Cinta jump down the side, like I said, very Mission Impossible. and things are rolling. Once the family gets captured and kidnapped, things get even more tense. I mean, why don't we do this? Why don't we take a break? When we come back, we'll talk about the actual operation itself, the execution of it, and key moments from a narrative perspective, because I think there's plenty to draw from here. I'm Dan Zare, and this is Coffee with Kenobi.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
We are back, and we are talking about the 6th episode of Andor, the Eye. The actual, we slowly get to see what the Eye actually is, and it's like celestial fireworks that at first just seem really quaint and lovely, but then it becomes this delightful, like it makes the Northern Lights look like Charlie Brown's Christmas tree. It really is explosive and wonderful. And honestly, Craig, I'm going to throw this one at you again. Nice to have another English teacher, so I don't have to field all the symbolism questions. What do you think is symbolic about this this particular experience as it goes along?
You know, it's weird. I think of it as like a rebirth, because it happens it's like every 3 years. There's kind of like a renewal of things, and clearly it's tied to tradition. And then you have this whole ceremony that they go through, but it's like we've kind of reset the clock a little bit. And just, it was so gorgeous though. My goodness. And I was impressed from it at the beginning, and the sound design on this too, just flying over is like, oh, well, this is cool. This is cool. And then they finally unload the entire spectrum of color too. And it's, it's a rainbow. So you also have, Noah imagery there too, right? So it's kind of also that renewal as well. I think that's probably what sparked it the most, the most for me.
Cool. Josh, what about you?
They went to plaid. I never thought I'd get to say that, but they went to plaid, and it was glorious. So I agree with the Aurora Borealis, like cranked up to 20 on the scale of 5. Mm-hmm. I was thinking of what the orbit would be like in that solar system for them to pass through that every 3 years. So it's probably 2 orbits going simultaneously. And the fact that you have the pilgrims tearing up, it's hard to imagine a 4th of July that would be like that, or being up at like Lake Tahoe and being able to see the Milky Way for the first time. There's just something that impressive and life altering that they were able to create with from grounded special effects and locations and beautiful sets to now we're going to have some fun with the FX department. It's earned. So I really appreciated it.
That's a really cool perspective I hadn't considered. The fact that we haven't seen a ton of special effects, truly, besides some TIE fighter flybys. And then when you actually get it, it very much delivers. And I like your Noah imagery, Craig, that you mentioned, but I find a lot of this very spiritual. It's very spiritual for the Donnie people. The number 3 is very sacred in Christianity. The fact that it happens every 3 years, I think, is important, because there's an uprising in spirituality. There's also the uprising of the rebellion itself. There's an uprising in awareness for us as an audience, because we're starting to see some of the Imperials as humans. It's very smart. Again, Dan Gilroy is an absolute genius. This is just absolutely tremendous. Things get very real when we see, I keep forgetting this Imperial's name. I need to just write it down.
J-Hold, right?
J-Hold,
family.
there you go. Yeah. Yes. I feel like this, I know that's the purpose, but everyone, the family's in peril. You've got a blaster pointed at the child's head, which is certainly not something for kids naturally. But it started to click for me. I didn't know how long it would last, but I feel like we might as well just take it all sort of in stride. When he's helping them to load up those carts with all the money on it, you can tell that he's getting winded because he's out of shape. And then you start to get the sense that there's something more going on. I think he has a heart attack, maybe, but I think his heart breaks for his family, for himself. I think it's so important that they are humanizing the Empire, not because we are supposed to empathize with them or even sympathize with them, but I think it's more about, look, and I'm just going to cut to the chase now. I feel like the theme of this entire episode is extremes are extreme. You can't label someone because of a particular belief system one way or another. There is so much more to a person. People are so much more layered. Oppression is horrific. Violence is a very last resort. It's also terrible. But there is so much more to people. And we see this at the end with what happens at the very, very end, which I want to say at the end of the show. I just think it's crucial to think about this man has a family, and he's oppressed a lot of people, and that does not make it right. It makes it even worse in some ways. But I just think I'm just so impressed with how they are shedding a light on all of this stuff. And feel free to take that, either of you, wherever you want.
Well, you mentioned it earlier, just how we can, empathize and sympathize with the Imperials because they become fully layered. And we see this guy who, the first time we meet him, he just comes off, again, he's the epitome of Imperial arrogance. But then we see he has a family. Mm-hmm. And then we see his wife kind of makes sarcastic comments to him, and he's not nice to his kid. But when it comes down to it, he's like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to save my family. So there are redeeming qualities in this guy.
Yes.
Which is a curveball, because it's easy to dislike a Tarkin and to go like, he's a really bad man, as opposed to he doesn't want his wife and kid to die. And he's asking the Imperials in the vault to cooperate because they have his wife and kid. We haven't seen anything like that in Star Wars that I remember. And there's a lot in the animated series that I could be forgetting, but I don't think we've ever seen this in live action before.
No, and the fact that Vel continues to put on all these variables, and the only outcome is, like, if this happens, they die. If this happens, they die. If this happens, they die. This is not the Jedi way. You can't help but wonder if, for argument's sake, an Obi-Wan Kenobi is with them. This thing goes down a lot differently. I mean, of course, it's easier because you got a Jedi with you, but I think the realism of this is what takes it to another area. He does say, look, they've got their hostages. They've already killed. I am sure they're going to do so again. I'm urging you to cooperate. And he's being like a very stand-up guy. Literally, he's standing up. He's being very honest with them. He's trying to save his soldiers' lives. He's trying to save his own life. And then he is just absolutely manhandled by these guys who are scared to death, of the Empire. But again, the humanity in this entire thing is really stunning, Josh.
Blown away. We've never seen anyone die of a heart attack in Star Wars before. So there's a lot to unpack with this, just from the brute symbolism. And seeing him start clenching the left side of his chest, the left arm, it's like all the signs of a heart attack.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to point out too, when we see him start to cave a little bit, is when you have Vel has that great line. She says, "One path, one choice, we win or everyone dies." Mm-hmm. And again, you're having that kind of inversion of who's the good guy here.
Yes. Exactly. And you just can't help but wonder. I was thinking, is Saw Gerrera involved with this plan at all? This is guerrilla tactics.
Yep.
And I like that, Craig. Who is the good guy here? Who is the good guy here, Josh?
The mercenary Cassian is the good guy because he's the one that has a moral center at the end. So Nemec definitely a true believer and falls into that. So I would say the two of them are the moral compass, and in Nemec's case, literally the moral compass. Mm-hmm. So just things you don't expect.
I want to talk about the actual escape itself. They use the Imperials to upload up all the credits. It's a fascinating thing. It's very, very stressful. Using like the dollies, for lack of a better term, and get everything going. The lieutenant has a heart attack. What happens to Lieutenant Gorn?
He's shot and killed. Or
Gorn is killed? I know the stormtrooper is shot and killed.
Gorn is shot when he runs towards Val when she's pinned down. So both of them take blaster bolts at that time. And I believe it was Gorn first. And then Tamar, I'm going to butcher his name.
Terramin.
Then he's second. And so that's why neither one of them make it out. And it's also why I have some concerns about what's going to happen because their corpses are left behind.
Right. Well, they're not going to be able to say anything, but they might be able to piece something together. I missed Gorn getting killed. I'm very bummed. I love him. I thought he's one of my favorite characters in this series so far. I was fascinated by his motivation. The escape itself, Craig, I didn't mean to cut you off. Were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to mention too. And then Cinta's left behind too, which I was really interested to see what's going to happen with her.
Yeah, apparently all part of the plan. She puts on different Imperial gear and she's just... Maybe the plan all along was for her to be a spy. And are we led to believe that she and Vel had a relationship? Does it look like that?
That's the way I read it.
Yeah. You both are great guys. I'm not going to hold either one of your hands. So like there's a definite symbol there of what's going on. And
absolutely.
I think it's part of the plan. And my note is, how does she leave the planet? Because she just walks out in all the chaos, does a change of clothes, and then hops on a freighter. Like, what's the way out?
I don't know. I don't think that's part of the plan. I guess we'll find out. And a little bit, the escape itself, I love seeing the ties get loaded up. We saw a little bit of that in the finale of season 2 of The Mandalorian, in the launch, and them adjusting everything and getting in their cockpits, and that was just fantastic. And then Karis Nemec takes this horrible injury that it proves to be fatal, where all of the weight smashes against him. At first, I thought he was going to be paralyzed, and apparently it caused him internal injuries. I'm guessing that's the cause of what his actual death is. Hard to say, but he's operating this equipment, and he's telling Cassian, first you got to go way up in the air, and because Cassian's like, tell me the coordinates, tell me where to go. Which, hello, symbolism. Cassian trying to figure out where he's going to go, where is his moral compass going to take him. I thought that was a lovely touch. So he's got to go way up, then he's got to dive, and then they escape from the ties. I'm not really sure where all of the effects from the eye are not hitting him too, but maybe that's because that's how Nemec was guiding him around. But eventually they escape, and there's a very quick conversation about we've got to save Nemec. He's got terrible injuries. One of the backup plans is having a doctor, which Vel reveals, but she doesn't seem to want to do it. But oddly enough, what's his name does? Why is his name not on my list? Skeen, yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So where do you want to take this, Craig?
Well, first off, the doctor has the best name. Dr. Quadpaw. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, and
that's got Pablo all over it.
I was like, that guy have 4 arms? Yes, he does. And then, I was watching it with the subtitles. It said Dr. Quadpaw. I was like, that's
Smart.
perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it seems like, Skeen wants to be somewhere close to his little moon where no one's hanging out. So that's probably what his end game is with that let's take him over there. Initial
conversation, you weren't thinking that. What were you thinking then? It looked like they're just all being empathetic, and she wasn't.
Yeah. Well, that was weird. That was a little strange because she's typically, and you wonder if maybe she's just a little shell shocked from all of this. We mentioned earlier how she was, hesitant to go forward with it. And then she goes whole hog and like, we're going to kill everybody if we don't make it through. And then, so maybe she's feeling a little disoriented morally because she's kind of flipping back and forth.
Is this her first major operation? I mean, we're led to believe this is the first major operation period, but something must have happened to put her in this position of authority. Don't know what that is. It's really hard to say. Let's go ahead, Josh, and let's talk about the conversation between Skeen and Cassian and his new sales pitch to Cassian, and ultimately what Cassian ultimately does. I mean, I don't think there's a question that this is murder.
It absolutely is murder. So I will say that unequivocally that, yeah, that was murder, maybe manslaughter, because Cassian was just so offended by what was happening. But Skeen does a solicitation for a conspiracy. Well, they'll go to the moon 8 parsecs away. They each get 40 million credits and just wait for things to blow over. And Cassian's so offended, he shoots the dude.
Mm-hmm.
Cassian shoots people in cold blood frequently. And what's weird for me as an attorney to go, that was the correct decision. And I don't say that thinking in terms of a lawyer, because it's absolutely murder. There's no legal justification for it. There's tactical justification for it when you're trying to fight the evil empire. And that's what makes people feel dirty and icky, because doing the wrong thing was the tactical right decision. Because Skeen could have blown everyone's cover. Skeen apparently was ready to betray everyone because he's a rebel for himself. He's not a team player. So this is where, once again, we're seeing Cassian be the moral center. He was the moral center and saying, we're going to the doctor. Where do I fly? And then saying, you're going to betray everybody? And he shoots Skeen.
Yeah,
those
Skeen
are
says
moral decisions.
it was quite a shock to me. Skeen says, I can't fly the trawler, but I do have a safe place where we can hold up. Cassian kind of like turns and he kind of raises up his posture. He's sitting more straight. He says, between two of us, we can make it. And Cassian's like, well, you're not. So no rebellion. And as you said, Josh says, well, I'm a rebel, but just me against everyone else. So this poor man has been so jaded that he is just given up on everything. I mean, he criticized Cassian earlier for only caring about the money, but that's like a mirror, right, for himself. Because Cassian's like, well, where is that going to leave me? And Skeen basically says, you're safe. 40 million is enough for me to forget about you. Cassian asks him about his brother in the orchard, and Skeen's like, no, I actually don't have a brother. Cassian seems disgusted, so you're just going to leave them here. Don't play the high, and then Skeen's like, don't play the high mind. You're not here to save anybody but yourself. And there's like a certain thing that Skeen says. It was like the last straw for Cassian. He says, we're basically the people climbing over somebody to get out of that hole. I know that look on your face. What is it that he says that sets Cassian off at the end? Oh, I know what he says. Let's just put that gun down. Let's catch our breath. Let's split up the winnings and walk. And he can't even finish walk away. Cassian starts to shake and he just, boom, blasts him right off the bat. Craig, what did you think about this? I've got a theory that I haven't heard anyone talk about yet, but I want to see what you think.
Well, I mean, these guys are foils for each other. Absolutely. I mean, Cassian is what Skeen says he is, but he's actually not, and vice versa. Skeen is the ultimate mercenary in this case. He tells the whole speech about his brother and the earlier episodes about why he's fully committed. It's a heart thing, and it's emotional, and he's got to get back, and he's there for the cash. And then Cassian's was initially there for the cash, and then he refuses to do that. So you can see how both of them are kind of disgusted with the mere image of each other. And I think that Cassian is kind of symbolically murdering that aspect of himself when he shoots Skeen. Mm-hmm. He's disgusted at that element of himself, because he's probably tempted to do that, but he wants to eliminate that possibility.
Right. I like that. That's a really cool way to look at it. When I watch it for the first time, I'm watching Skeen say this stuff. And I'm actually thinking the entire time, well, what is Cassian going to do? I legitimately thought, gentlemen, that Skeen was not serious. I thought he was still testing Cassian. I legitimately thought he was testing him. And then Cassian shoots him, and I actually said out loud, oh, Like I just yell, oh, okay. I didn't expect that. I should have. And I thought, well, there's either two things here. Either we'll never know if he was serious or not, and if he was still messing with him, because he just kind of seems like that kind of person. Or it was serious, and Cassian, who appears to be a pretty good judge of character, quite honestly, seeing who he kind of befriends throughout the history of when we've seen him, he's just not having it. His answer is, I'm going to kill you. Like we see at the beginning of Rogue One. So really alarming, really shocking, and absolutely wonderful storytelling. He goes in to Vel. We find out that unfortunately Nemec is dead from his wounds. Cassian says, I'm going to give you 30,000 credits for the ship in the barn. And he also gives him, he says that's twice what it's actually worth. And then he gives Vel that blue Kyber crystal. He says, return this to your friend. You know, he tells him what happened. Look, he wanted to take the money and leave you all here. Cassian lays everything on the table. He's very honest. Anything you can say about Cassian, anything Vel can say about Cassian, he's been very honest. He's never lied about anything. I mean, he hasn't lied about anything. And he only takes what he's earned. And then he leaves because he says that he is done. And he says, look, if I were you, I would not stick around either. Take this to your friend. And then she does something interesting. She gives him Nemec's manifesto, which is something that I would love to read. It's very inspirational. Anytime we see Nemec read from it, it's really quite captivating. But I think it's cool that he says, look, I'm done. She seems to trust him. Is that what's going on here?
I think so.
Yeah.
I
Everybody,
think Nemec,
why? She believes him. I think she believes him.
well, first, I think Nemec has a treatise, not a manifesto. Manifesto is like Unabomber territory, so
Okay.
let's just put a positive spin
I
on it.
did not know that.
Yeah, so it's,
Me neither. Thank you.
just
Yes.
you don't hear here's my manifesto on freedom. Like that's generally a red flag of ooh, no. Cassian has been true the entire time.
Mhm.
And he wasn't trying to take 80 million credits. He was, and I think it's returning the Sky Kuiper, because he was a Bailey of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, take it, give it back to your friend. Notice no names are used,
Right.
and he's getting out of Dodge. So yeah, I do think Cassian is true.
I do too. She believes him. She's more challenging. There's so many. Craig, I feel like people use a complex character in talking about Star Wars a lot, and I sometimes find it to be not applicable. This series, it's applicable.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone has shades of gray. I mean, our main character, our protagonist, is murdering people.
Yep.
And then, three times exactly. And then we also get to say, yeah, but he was right at the same time. So that's really interesting territory.
It's just so great. The doctor you mentioned is the terrific name. Then we get to a quick scene where Daedra and everyone is going into the ISB. No one's going home. Tell your staff, tell your families. Every star sector and planetary emergency retaliation plan is in the building, ready for presentation by midnight. And then there's a quick scene where Mon Mothma is in the Senate, which we know very well from the prequels. And there are a lot of empty cars. And there are a lot of people that are very distracted because they're all getting the news at the exact same time of what is going on. Then we switch over to Luthen. He gets the news. He goes back in the back and he puts his hands up, puts his hands on his head. He laughs. And then he literally at the end, it says exhales. If you have the captions on, I know you mentioned the captions earlier. I think watching these shows in the captions is absolutely the way to go because some of the stage description gives away a lot of key information. as well as learning characters' names, which apparently I need to write down. But yeah, there's 2 quick scenes there. Gentlemen, any takeaways as we wrap things up?
We don't do predictions, but
No.
this is going to have an impact on the next episode. So it's going to be a launching point. Everyone we just saw will be in the next episode. I think is a safe bet.
I really like the symbolism too of there's less and less people in the Senate. There's less and less reason to put up a pretense of wanting any kind of legitimate peace or order. Whereas the First Order, it doesn't ever appear to even put up a pretense. There's more just like oppression. We're going to smile through our teeth. But the Empire is starting to give up. And I have expected to see Palpatine in the Senate, but he obviously wasn't there.
Yeah, I felt bad for Mon Mothma. As a teacher who has kids talking in the background, that was immediately where I went to. But they're just distracted, and just to see her, she's just plugging along, and she's already, the wheels are in motion with the Rebel Alliance and things like that. But it's like, here's just in case you hadn't already noticed that, whatever shred of democracy was left is not working. You just made this beautiful speech about, trying to help these people, and literally no one cares.
Nope, no one cares. So she's got to get on her Star Wars iPad and get the news, and then credits roll. Credits roll, gentlemen. Is there anything we didn't talk about? We kind of did more of, there's just a lot. There's a lot to bring in here. I think the overall themes were covered pretty well. But is there anything we didn't cover that you want to bring up? Craig, let's start with you.
You said it really well that, episodes 1 through 3 kind of build together, and then 4, 5, and 6 kind of build together. And so it very much was a payoff for this. I'm glad they're releasing it on a weekly basis, because we get to talk about each individual episode. But this was definitely a payoff. The pacing was so fast in this episode, and there was nothing, you couldn't look away. There was just so much going on. And the last few episodes that I've watched, I've been able to kind of research some of the things that are happening while it's going on. No, I had to pause because I did not want to miss anything. This was so engaging.
It's tremendous. Josh, what about you? Any last minute thoughts?
3 story arcs work. The fact that the ISB wanted a retaliation plan is terrifying. And it's not a response plan, retaliation plan. Just brilliant. Keep giving these people money to make more things. So.
Yes. And we've got 5 episodes left, right? Because it's an 11 episode first season. I don't know where we're going to go from here, but I imagine that casting's going to be, if he goes back home, I feel like he's going to be different.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
And gentlemen, I can't thank you both enough for being on Coffee with Kenobi. You both are excellent, inspired, intelligent content creators. So I would love for you to plug your shows and let everybody know where they can find you. Craig, let's start with you.
Sure. Reading Between the Reels. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Our last episode, we did a deep dive on the movie Tombstone. That's the one that's out right now. And our next one, I know you're excited about this, Dan, is Man of Steel. And I'm going to have Anthony King on from Force Ghost Conversations, and we are going to manifest the return of Henry Cavill, because we're both very excited about that.
You need to have someone on who you're both going to you're both going to be so effusive. How are you going to get a well-rounded? You need to get me on there. Okay, Josh, what about you?
You can find us on the Legal Geeks, as in thelegalgeeks.com. All social media, the Legal Geeks, and wherever you listen to podcasts, the Legal Geeks. We just had episode 400, which was on the last episode of Andor. We've been doing 3 a week because we have She-Hulk and Lower Decks out right now. We've never done 3 a week before, so it's been an adventure. Yeah, a lot to talk about. But thank you for having me.
Of course, gentlemen, it's been great. Both Both Reading Between the Reels and the Legal Geeks are outstanding, as are the both of you. Thank you so much. Please let all of us know what you think about this really important dynamic episode, The Eye, and get your top fives ready so that you can join us next Tuesday night at 7 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time and bring your top 5 lists of what you love about this episode, The Eye. That's going to do it for this week's show. Thank you so much, everybody. We will see you on Tuesday night on Facebook Live. Have a great weekend.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.